Hello, and welcome to episode three of, that's two. This is three of Sovereign Thoughts, Why AI Pilots Fail. One of the things I want to talk about today, as you know, these are all unscripted. So I'm going to kind of talk in maybe circles, but at the end, I will be uploading once again a summary of the conversation to the website. So you can always feel free to go back and look at just the summary if you prefer. But in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about why AI pilots fail. And as it may not be a shock to anybody, it's no different than the reason of any technology implementation does. And just a little background so that you know where I'm coming from. I spent about 30, a little over 30 years now in financial services. I've always worked in banking or credit unions, I guess both of them. I consider banking just to be the broad category, but I've done basically pilots or implementations or technology and operations really since I began in very early days. And one of the things that I've learned, this was back in really the business process reengineering days and some of the early technology, even implementations. We had desktops, but the use of technology and uh, the way we ran the operational groups is very rudimentary, let's just say at the very start, and kind of has grown up. And I've been lucky enough, I guess, to participate in that over the course of my career. Um, I think I started off just, knowing operations. I spent probably the first half of my career in operations and then the second half in technology. And I remember when I first started, I've started in investment services, and there was a person next to me that did pledging at the time. And in those days, when you did pledging, it was on a triplicate form and you typed, and if you made a mistake, you had to throw the form away. This just tells you how early this was. So if you typed it in and you made a mistake, you threw the form away. But what happened is that um, instead of instead of having to throw that form away and start over, made a little application. It was in Excel at the time, and what I did is I had her enter the fields in Excel, and I would translate them over to a second sheet, and I lined up all the fields. I'm telling you, this is how rudimentary it was. I lined up all the fields so that they would fit on that Excel spreadsheet on the second page. And when she clicked print, it would print out the form, never having an error because she corrected it. And basically, it was just data entry on the first page. Click tab. Now you got the new form. Click print, and away you went. So that was really my first, I guess, exposure to business process reengineering. But when I did that, all of a sudden I became a business process reengineer in the bank. So I started getting chosen for some of the more interesting projects. And one of the things I said pilot when I first got on this call, and I think that's a term that I actually most of the time have eliminated from my vocabulary because very early on, I remember executive told us that pilots imply that there's an opportunity to go back, and these projects that you work on, there's no opportunity to go back, so you have to execute. And that always stuck with me is because I never really look at pilot or a new project as a pilot anymore. I always look at it as just the first implementation of whatever we're trying to do. So just to give you a little background on kind of some of my philosophy of why I hardly ever say pilots. And when you look at them as execution, everything becomes an opportunity then. There is no issues. They're just opportunities to improve what we've already done. But one of the first kind of moving past that, and I'm going to get to why what we've built or what we're building and is so relevant now, is I want to give you kind of some of the flavors that we've worked through and how I've kind of progressed over the years. One of the first major projects I did was for a division, a corporate trust division within the bank, and we were a fairly large bank, I guess, at the time, and we had done, I believe, between 15 and 17 acquisitions over a 2-year period. And of course, when you do an acquisition, every department or every, I guess, acquired company does it a little differently, right? And so now we had 17 ways. It's called 17 ways of doing the exact same thing, depending on what company you went out, what acquired entity you went out and visited. So what the directive was is to integrate all 17, bring them into the fold, and not just say that this is the way we're going to do it, because that would be the easy way, right? To say, well, we have the right way, we're going to do it that way. No, what we did is we actually went out there and we looked at all of the different areas, all 17 areas. This is a multi-year project that we spent time on. I think the first year was just trying to do collection and re-engineering and recommendation work, and then after that, it was multi-year implementation. And one of the things we did is, like I said, we would go out and look at each one of the 17 companies and figure out what was the best way to do each one of these different processes, each one of the, the different I guess systems. We looked at everything end to end, financials, how long it took us to do stuff, and we came back with a set of recommendations that really redesigned the way corporate trust was done within the bank. And it was really an exciting project. I had a great team that I got to work with at the time. I was very fortunate. I think I was maybe in my second year working for the bank. So, and there was only 9 of us that were selected to do it out of, I mean, I don't even know how big corporate trust was, maybe 5,000 people at the time. So it was really a great opportunity, but it taught me a lot as well, right? In that, you know, collecting and analyzing, re-engineering work is hard. This was back in the 90s, and a lot of it was done on paper. We built flows, we'd enter them hand into the systems that we were using. If we built spreadsheets, much like we do today, right? We'd build spreadsheets to try to analyze financials and time motion to understand how much time it was costing us to get things done. Um, and so if you kind of move forward, then a couple of years later, I went to work for another one of the, I guess this one would be called one of the national banks, and very large bank, if not one of the largest for mortgage. And when I walked into there, they hired me and they said, "We got a project for you." And they walked me down to the basement. And in the basement, they had a couple scanners. And they said, "We don't know what to do with them. The executive bought them. We don't really know how to run them, but this is your project. Make it work." And so the first thing is, okay, what is scanning? Right? I had never done imaging before. I came out of more of, I mean, definitely a process design background, and I understood the technology, but I had no idea what imaging even was. This was so new that, we didn't even know what we were going to do with the images. So first thing we figured out is, how do we get the scanners up and running? What do they do? And then the second thing is now we had to look at where are we going to put them in? What processes, because capturing an image of a document doesn't do anything for you, right? You have to do something with it. And there was some workflows out there that at the time that were very early on about how to, integrate imaging within the workflow and some of that, but really nothing that was great, right? So, what I did is I said, okay, first of all, where are we going to put it? We have a lot of different areas. At the time, I was in a post-closing department, so I looked at, okay, where is the biggest bottlenecks that we have problems, and one of the areas that I went to is it was easy to identify. As far as the eye could see, there was carts of work to be done. And every cart had 4 rows, and they were probably about 4 feet wide, and they were stacked with loans that had closed. And I don't even imagine there was probably 100 cards of these. So imagine how many loans were sitting there that had to be reviewed. And what the department would do, it was that actually pull the document off or pull the file off. It would review the document information against the screen. And it would, if it found an error, they would correct the error. And when they reviewed all the documents against all the information we had captured, then they would send it on to the next department. Well, that seemed pretty ripe for opportunity. So what I did is I went down like normal business process at the time, and we sat down with each one of the people in the department, and we captured all of the notes, captured what the process was, what they did, if they pulled out a little sheet of paper that sat on the side of their desk because they needed it for reference. I mean, how many still have that today? I can go up to a department today, then I'll see them bringing up an Excel spreadsheet or pulling out a reference document that they need. It's not, I mean, today, we always think that we're so sophisticated on technology, and we're still pulling out paper and using Excel spreadsheets and, things outside of the system. So, but the short story of that one is, and maybe it's not so short anymore, but the short ending of that was when we got done, we were able to capture every loan that came into that department right at the front. So we sat next to the mailroom. As soon as it came in, we would pull out those loans, we would send them over, we would capture them. But then we would do a number of processes on them, and one of them was extracting the data. We extracted the data, and then we run another program that said, okay, what does the system say we have? And we would compare the two. And lo and behold, maybe 1%, maybe 2% of all the loans had to actually be manually reviewed and changed. So we went from reviewing 100% of the work to something like 98% of the work would be flow through the process with never being touched, and we would correct the last 2%. Wasn't long before I went up to that department and I walked around and I talked to the supervisor who I knew, and I said, where are all the carts? I mean, we're talking not many, like maybe a month or two after we put that in. And he's like, they're gone. We're real time now. And I think that's one of the things that really hit me the most, is that because all of a sudden, they were so far behind that everybody was stressed. They're working late, in the bank, you probably don't get paid a lot for working late or anything most of the time. It's kind of an expectation, right? So, but it was gone. So no more trying to manage 6 projects and all the work backlog that you had. The work, now you're real time, so you felt good at the end of the day. And I think that's part of it too, right? Is I always liked business process engineering because if I did my job well, when I was done, people felt good, right? Because all of a sudden it worked. I wasn't overloaded with work and stress. And BPR in the later years kind of changed that, because what happened is it became more of a reason for replacement or elimination. But in the early days, it was really around how do we make this work? And I always tell a story that when I first started in BPR, I read a book, and for the life of me, I can't remember. I wish I could remember it anymore. But it was around how to do effective process engineering. And if you think about, you walk into an office, and those of you who've probably seen some of my posts have seen this before. You walk into an office and you imagine everything in that office is tied together. And if you slide the desk to the left, the lamp falls off the table on the right? And if you move the couch one direction, the desk moves the other, and it's not by the window anymore. So you're kind of optimizing, and that's the key point, is you need to optimize for the best situation of not just one position, but everything in the room. And if you think about business process, it's exactly the same thing. If we automate the process with AI, but we break everything around it, the front can't serve enough, and the back is overloaded with work because it was so efficient in the middle. That really didn't make a better process. It made a clumsy process, and more than likely a broken one, but it didn't make it better. And I think that's why, when you do a pilot for AI, and a lot of these that I've seen and reviewed, what happens is that, we're so focused on, does it work for the function, rather than does it work for the process and does it work for the organization. We're so focused on the function, and we say, oh, yeah, pilot worked great. It did exactly the function we wanted it to. And then we put it into the organization, and it breaks. It doesn't break the process, it breaks the organization. It doesn't break the process it was specifically for, it breaks all the process around it. And when you look at, process design, you have to look at both the inputs and the outputs. And one of my favorite process methodologies is using IDFO, which has inputs, outputs, controls, and process or procedure. And you look at that as a map and say, okay, what are all my inputs? Who am I getting work from, and who I'm getting an output out to? And if you're not mapping that when you do an AI pilot, if you're only saying, does it work for this particular piece of the process, you're more than likely to have a problem when you put it into operation. And I think that's so critical around, a new system design and implementation. You can't just, I mean, how many of us have put systems into an organization, and when we put it in there, the common response is, well, it didn't work like I thought that they said it would. I have more problems after I put it in than when I didn't. I mean, imaging thing was the same way, right? Is they bought it, they didn't know what to do with it. And if they would have just captured the images, number one, they wouldn't have gotten any value out of it, because doing nothing with a picture of a piece of paper doesn't really add much value. And if they hadn't gone up and actually looked at the departments that have problems, they may not have been optimizing the right ones that really could benefit from using that technology. And I think that's where, over my career, like I said, my last half has been in technology and looking at, how do we implement it? But implementing technology, even when I've been in technology, is not just about the technology itself. It's around the organization that is around that company that we're going to put it into. And one of the things that, as I started looking at this, and even though I've mentioned AI a number of times here, this really isn't an AI question, right? It's what I've built and that I'm really excited about, and I'm in building it now. Matter of fact, so it's not done. This is what I said, is that I'm kind of building in public. Um, but I built a system that I'm colloquially calling Atlas. And what it does is, in the old days when we would go out, in old days, I guess I'm getting old. Um, in the old days, in the early part of my career, let's call it that instead of old. In the early part of my career, like I said, we would go out and visit department by department. We would capture all of the interviews. We would capture the systems they use and the processes, and then redesign them by hand. And one of the things I think that's so neat today is, um, now I can create an interviewer. So in the past, maybe I could do a department, maybe three departments a year. I could do a whole enterprise. I could capture those interviews from the whole enterprise in a matter of weeks. So no longer working kind of department by department, which actually, as I mentioned, is probably not the ideal way to do it, but at least the department is optimized. Um, but or the process maybe is end to end, maybe across a couple different departments. But now we can interview the whole area, the whole division, the whole company, weeks. And out of that, I take those interviews. We basically look at abstracting for where do we have gaps, where do we have disconnects in the process, where do we have redundancy, and we can re-engineer it. Now, it doesn't sound like AI, does it? No, it's not. It's business process reengineering, which I've kind of titled now agentic process reengineering, because it does include agents that help me a lot. Number one is all those interviews are all now either voice, or or text, and they're all unguided. Basically, I give it what I'm asking or what I'm looking for from the interview. It conducts them on the time that the employee wants. They can start, they can stop, they can go for 10 minutes and say, I'm tired, I want to stop. They can pick up where they left off. Whereas if I have to go out there and do it, then they're going to sit there for an hour or two, and they're going to walk me through that process end to end. I'm going to ask questions. Not That doesn't happen anymore. All of the interviews then are synthesized together, and behind the scenes, we have, I think, about 20 agents now. Looks at all the way from executive reviews to gaps to opportunities, identifies agentic opportunities where we should look at putting agents or AI into the process, all of that. Where we still add value, I think, as consultants and as advisors, and I guess, as business process owners, even if you work for the credit union, the bank, the private equity firm, the companies that we do a lot of work with, where that value comes in is there was not a lot of value in the capture, even when we used to do it, right? The capture was a way to give us information that we could use to redesign. And so getting rid of that part, not really getting rid of it, but I guess re-engineering, let's call it that part of it, streamline the rest of it for us. So now we can generate those documents, we can generate those interviews, And we can go in there and provide our highest value work, which is looking at it all and saying, does this make sense? Does it fit the organization? Does it fit what the project, what the guidance, what the strategy is? And we can work on that level of of knowledge and thought and experience versus, that more rote level of, oh, you're doing this, let me capture that, let me spend, I spent hours in the past, weeks, months building process maps. I mean, how many of you seen cross-functional maps, that are 16 feet long and 8 feet high, and they've got every swim lane in there from customer all the way down to technology and every process in between. And those took a lot of time. And now, once I approve the process, the interviews, that process agent will build me a process map for me, and I can just go in there and look at it. Does it make sense? Does it is it consistent with what I saw in the interviews? So that part of the automation I think has been great for us, because it really streamlined. Like I said, now we can do business process engineering in a matter of weeks that used to take us months, and at a scale that we could never do in the past. So I think that is the most exciting part about Atlas. We can generate a number of different artifacts out of it. One of the artifacts that we do generate is something I think last time, well, I know last time we talked a little bit about Cognos, which I showed you, which is kind of the memory layer of the system. And then I also talked to kind of about the digital twin that gets fed from Cognos. And this is the capture, right? Atlas captures, Cognos remembers, and Orion uses. And I've been kind of moving away from them names, but that really is the process that happens. And having an interview tool like this, and really, more than the interview, the agents that can assemble it so that I can look at the output, the final output, and add my value to it, I think is just moves us from very kind of rudimentary skills. Even now that, if you go out and hire a lot of consultants, first thing they're going to do is they're going to want to see the process. They're going to talk about it. They're going to want to interview the workers to figure out how they do the work. That all goes away. Process, procedure docs. So even though this is a discussion on I mean, this is well before that even. I mean, this starts out at the very fundamental of what do we do, when do we do it, and how do we do it. And once you understand that, then technology, whether it's AI or a new system, a new core, whatever it is that you're putting in becomes a lot easier because you have all of it documented. You know how the company does the work. And so that's a little bit about kind of Atlas and how we got here, and why I'm really excited about what we're building. And I'd love to show you. I'll continue to kind of talk about what it is that we have and how it all fits together. And more than, I don't want this to be a discussion around, oh, try Atlas. I just want to create an opportunity to kind of think about, looking at the organization and how you capture information and what's really possible today, right? These are things that weren't possible in the past, that now is available to us. Even if you say, I'm not an AI forward organization yet, using the tools that are available to do stuff that improves the manual process or the systemic kind of business that we do every day, is a great opportunity. So I really want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll keep this one short since it probably is a holiday weekend for most people. And if you have any questions or want to see Atlas or any of the systems that we're putting together in practice, and you want to see it in action, let me know. But thank you for joining and have a great day.